My name is Sandra Doyle, and I go by Sandy, and I live in the middle of Indiana, around Muncie, Indiana, and I am retired. I am a mother of 7 and a grandmother of 19.
That's a lot of grandkids.
That's a lot of grandkids. I'm currently, will be tomorrow anyway, Vice President of Middle America for the Optimist International organization. And I have wrote a book, My Life at the Cemetery, and it's not as dead as you think.
And that is what we are here to talk about today. I am so excited that we connected on that Facebook group that we're part of, looking for podcast hosts and guests and all that. I saw your post go up saying that you wrote this book and you were looking to be on podcasts. I'm like, this is so perfect. I've got to talk to this woman.
It was a whole different life, that's for sure.
Yeah, just getting into the book, I can see that it was a totally different life. I got my copy in the mail this past weekend and I powered through the first third of it in just a couple of hours yesterday evening as I was reading it. It's one of those, like, you always say, you can't put it down. You just got to keep reading. No, truly, this is one of those books where I cannot put it down.
Well, I love that. And there's a lot. It was a bunch of stories, or I call them the events that happened when I worked at the cemetery. I was called a cemetery counselor, and that meant that when people came through the door on my day on, whether it was a at need or a pre-need, or if they were just coming in to buy, or they came in to have questions, or they were looking for somebody, I was the one that showed them where it was. And then if there was a funeral going on that day, then I would get in my car and I would lead the funeral into the burial spot where they were going to be, or if they were going into the mausoleum, I would take them there. And so that's what I did.
Just by like reading the first third of this book, this doesn't sound like any small cemetery. Like, this sounds like a pretty large operation.
Yeah, we had, I think, approximately 300 burials a year at that time. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And there was, it just kept growing and growing. They had a good marketing plan to start with, it was, I always said $10 down, $10 a month, no interest, no finance charges, you can have your space. So that's basically the way that it was when I first went to work there. And then by the time, I left just after a big corporation bought the cemetery out.
Okay.
It was just a whole different feel at that time for me.
So let's backpedal here. How did you initially find this job? Were you just going through like the local paper and saw a listing for it?
Yes. Yeah. I had been in the insurance field, life and health insurance. And I was just, I don't know, stressed, I guess. I wanted something that had a little bit more flexibility and time, because there was 4 of us. So we each worked 2 days a week. And then that was just, I don't know, we had a schedule. Like every month a new schedule would come out as to when we were working. If you weren't working, then you could try to make phone calls to other people or to clients that you had, which I started right off the get-go. If a person passed away, a family member, and then I would give them a couple of weeks, and I always call and to find out how they were and if they had any questions for me and how things went. And you would be surprised what people would ask me and or what they would tell me. And yeah, so
hence the book.
Yeah, the book happened when I worked, in which you read the first story. So we'll get back to that in a minute. But I came back in from the burial, and then when all of this, the ex-wife appeared, and the girlfriend appeared, and the boyfriend appeared. And I said, one of these days, I'm going to write a book. And my thought was it would be days of our lives at the cemetery. The more things that happened, the more I would say, one of these days, I'm going to write a book. Well, COVID happened. And during COVID, I was diagnosed with lung cancer and 2nd stage COPD. And so I thought, if I'm going to write the book, I'd better get it done. So I wrote the book. It took me a little over a year. to write it, because I had never wrote a book before, and I had to have a lot of help from my higher power to do this. I was just I was I was just really satisfied with the way it turned out. I was very surprised. So
It's a wonderful read. Like, I didn't fully know what to expect when I ordered it and cracked it open yesterday evening. And I love that it's just these short, little digestible stories, which
right.
makes it easy to binge read it, or you can easily read a story, put it down, come back to it. You need a little brain break, grab the book, read a couple stories. It's so easy to read. Your storytelling is fantastic too. Like, I feel like I'm working there with you, sitting here watching all of these things play out.
Yeah, it was, and a lot of it, I changed the names of everybody because I did not want that to go out. So all of the names were changed, and the descriptions, of that person, I would change that. But the event and the things that was said are as real. That happened.
And some of them you just like, you read it and you go, that actually happened. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I guess we better tell your people that the first story, basically, and it was one of the first families that I waited on. It was a young guy who had died of a heart attack, and his ex-wife and his son, who was in the military, and his 16-year-old daughter had came in to make arrangements, and they had no clue what to do, or they were simply utterly lost and devastated. And so we ended up, there was two spaces right next to his mother where his mother was buried, and then two spaces underneath. And I told them I would put those 4 spaces on hold for 60 days in case anybody wanted them. And so when I called after my 2 weeks to the ex-wife, she told me that she was going to buy the space next to him because that was the father of her children. And she said, and if something would happen to one of the kids, I'd want that space. And I said, okay. And then it wasn't but about a week or so later, a young girl came in and said that she needed to spend eternity with him because they had been lovers for over almost 10 years. And she wanted to be buried as close to him as she could get. So I sold her the space at his feet. And then it must have been about maybe a week at the most, this gentleman come in and he said, I need to buy a space as close to him as I can get because I know he would want me to spend eternity with him because we had been lovers since high school. So it was the deceased, and right next to him is the ex-wife, and at his feet is the girlfriend, and at the feet of the ex-wife was the boyfriend.
Some of us just have so much love to give in this world.
My thing was, no wonder he had a heart attack. Wasn't it ironic that he was buried in the Garden of Love?
So fitting.
So fitting. Yeah.
And for the podcast listeners, this is the very first story in the book. So you read it, you read the prologue, and this is the one that you get right into it. You're like, okay, this is going to be a good read.
This is a read. Yeah. And I mean, people are people. I mean, they just are. And I feel very blessed and very fortunate that I got to work there because I met some fantastic people, listened and heard stories that I could not even imagine, in my life. And I would think, wow, have I been sheltered? Have I lived a sheltered life? And some of the homes, I mean, I would be going into different homes, and I was into $1 million homes that didn't have any furniture. And I was into homes that had dirt floors, and I was into homes that smelled so bad that I always had a scarf around with my coat, and I would pull the scarf up, try to breathe into the scarf because the homes were so nasty.
And it's just insane that like there's every single walk of life you can imagine in this world. And the one thing we have in common is we all die, and we all got to make a plan for it at some point.
Yeah. And I tell everybody, you plan for a birth of a child, you plan for college, you plan for a job or a new job, you plans for a new home or a home, or to buy a new car and to retire. And but nobody wants to talk about death. And in doing this and reliving a lot of it, and at the end I talk about my death of my husband, and I came to the realization that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and while that body dies and is in that cemetery, that spirit, that soul's not there. That soul goes on, and I do believe with everything that that spirit, that soul hovers over the loved ones that they left behind. I don't know why I believe that, just from the different examples in the book, rereading them. And then the death of my husband, after he passed away, I was in St. Louis for an Optimist convention and training. And all of a sudden I felt somebody tap me on my shoulder, and I turned over and looked, and there he stood. He stood with a black suit, red tie. Okay. And we buried him in a white polo with black jeans because he was a golfer, and that's what he always was in, was a white or a polo, a shirt of some sort. And I looked at him and I thought, I can't do this now. I can't do this now. And I said, go away, go away. We'll talk later. I turned back over and went to sleep because I was exhausted. But I knew from some of the people that I had encountered and had talked to, and how many people would ask me, do you believe they come back? Do you believe, I've seen them. I've seen my loved one. Is that right? Is that normal? Have you heard of somebody else doing that? And yeah, happens quite regularly. Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that as well. We unexpectedly lost my husband's dad in 2021 to a heart attack out of nowhere. Every now and then, he'll just come and visit me in a dream, and he's wearing the same thing every time. He's got his flannel shirt on. He's
Yeah.
him, and we chat about whatever. It's usually before a big life event happens. Like my sister-in-law just got married a couple weeks ago, so a few weeks before that, he visited me, and we were talking about the wedding and stuff. And I'm a firm believer as well that they stay in touch with us, and they're watching over us, and they're there with us.
They're there because I think, and only God knows, but I do believe that God created us in love, and love abounds. Love doesn't, and the closer you are to loving somebody, your family, your friends, people at work, people in your organization or whatever, the more that you love and the more you put love out there, the love just abounds. Love comes back to you. And just because somebody died doesn't mean that they are not still loving you.
Exactly. That love doesn't go anywhere. It stays right here.
No, it sure doesn't.
So there were a couple of stories that I made note of that I wanted to talk to you about just from the first little part of the book that I got to read.
Okay.
The one that really stuck with me, I even woke up this morning thinking about it, was the story about the guy on the motorcycle who rolled up, and I want you to tell it from your perspective because it was such a good story. And like I said, I literally woke up thinking about it.
Yeah, it was on a Sunday, and it was very, I want to say dead. There wasn't anything going on. And all of a sudden, this beautiful blue Harley Davidson motorcycle, pulled up out in the drive, and I was sitting at the desk to where I could see people coming in and out. And he came in and he said, honey, this is your lucky day. And so he told me, he said, I need to make sure I've got everything done because I'm taking off. I'm going to the hills. I'm going to explore this United States. And I have always wanted to do that. But my wife left me with 3 kids, and I have raised them. And now my kids think I'm crazy because I retired. I sold my house. I sold my car. I've sold everything. I'm going to be on the road. And so all he needed was his opening and closing and his memorial, which our cemetery was just a black bronze memorial. And so I asked him what he wanted to put on there. And he said, could we do mountains and maybe a motorcycle on there? And I said, sure, we could do that. And so then always we'd tell people around the base, you could put words like in God's loving care or together forever or whatever. And I said, what would you like to put around the base? Would anything? And he said, stopped, and he looked at me and he said, yeah, but damn, I wish I was reading this. And I thought, I busted out laughing because I didn't know what, I had never heard that before. And I busted out laughing. And he said, I'm serious. Put that on there. He said, I would love to be standing there looking at that. So, okay. So that's what we did.
It's just, there's so many different approaches people can take to the topic of death. Some people clam up and they don't want to talk about it. Some people are okay talking about it to a certain extent, but then they kind of reach that line where like, oh, I can't go any further on this topic. And then there's motorcycle guy who's like, nope, I'm good with what I've done. I'm off on a new adventure. I just want this taken care of and I want to have a good time with it. Like,
yeah,
I love that approach.
Yeah, he was something. And you know, he basically, he said, you take care of yourself, honey, then walked out the door. And I'm thinking, I never heard from him again. I have no clue. Again, he still may be in the mountains for all I know.
I truly hope he's out riding the open road right now, just enjoying
Yeah.
his life and living it to the
Just
fullest.
enjoy it. And there's a story in there, and I don't know whether you got to it or not, but the community had lost a young kid, and he was a very avid motorcycle rider. And there was a club, and he was always doing something for people, like a kid that had cancer, and they would do a motorcycle event and this kind of thing. And he was very well known in the community for doing all kinds of things like that. I'm setting out, waiting, and I get a call from the office that the funeral was en route, and there was probably 150 motorcycles. And sure enough, they got there, they pulled in. Some of the motorcycle guys were the pallbearers, and they carried the casket. And in the mausoleum, they had a goodbye type thing at the mausoleum. And then those guys carried the casket out to the burial space, and they talked about how great he was and his family and what all the things that he had done and how he was going to be missed and all of this. And I thought angels come in different ways, and that day they came on motorcycles.
Yeah, sometimes angels are dressed in leather.
Dressed in leather, that's right.
Another story that really stuck out to me was the Afternoon Delight one.
Yeah, that was very embarrassing to me, but I remember it just like it was yesterday. It was really, yeah, I mean, it was like it went on for months. You know, we had this truck that would pull in and go to the back, and then wouldn't be 10 minutes later, this convertible would come in and go to the back. And we, of course, everybody was joking about it in the office because they would see it. But I didn't realize that the guys in the back, you know, the burials and took care of the mowing and stuff like that, they were well aware of what was going on. And so one rainy day, basically, they were there. I mean, like, it was like they didn't leave. Usually they left, you know, like 1:00 on the dot. But no, this time it was like after 3, and they were still there. And just before that, you know, when I found out that the guys knew it, and I had been listening to the radio, waiting on the burial things or funeral to come in, and Afternoon Delight was on the radio. And lo and behold, the guy said, have you seen this truck and this convertible go back in the back? And I said, yes. He said, what do you think they're doing? And I just said, Afternoon Delight. Well, sure enough, I was right. So I put in the book, basically, if you think your spouse is cheating on you, check the cemetery. Because you don't know.
You truly never know. My very first job was actually working in a cemetery. I worked for a local floral shop in my small town. I was the flower waterer for a summer. So I would haul 5-gallon buckets around this whole cemetery, watering all the flowers, making sure that they were like pruned and looking beautiful. But truly, on any given day, you never knew what you were kind of walking into. And our cemetery is in like the middle of town, right next to the fairgrounds, like pretty heavy traffic around that area. And there would be people who would come and hook up hoses like to the flower watering spouts and like shower in the cemetery. There were people who would like come and like make out in the cemetery. Like, it's just, you truly never know what's going to happen in these places.
No, you do not. And I don't know. We would always have people that would come of an afternoon or early in the morning and they would walk. They would do their walks all through the cemetery. And we had, and I don't know whether you got to that story or not, but there's a story in there that there was some young kids, and they, like when they would get out of school and they would be there, and we would leave at 5 o'clock and those kids were still there, and just wondering what in the world they were doing, or what were they up to, and that kind of thing. And then our cemetery was on one part, and then there was a kind of like a little creek that ran through, and they had built a covered bridge to go over it to the funeral home. And so I had an appointment at 5 o'clock at the funeral home. And so on my way back through, I happened to see some naked butts run under the bridge. And they were just young kids. There was like 4 of them, young kids. And I mean, I knew they were experimenting, and I kept thinking, wonder if they got splinters in their back end.
Yeah, you just truly never know what's going to happen. And I love that your story really touches on those silly and fun stories. And it also has the heartwarming ones as well. It's such a wonderful mix of everything. And the way you have it laid out, it's not ever too heavy, because the next one's usually a light one, or it's not just all funny ones. There's some that like pull on the heartstrings. Like, I feel like you did a really great job of laying out the book that way.
Thank you. I can definitely tell you the one that I had the most problems with. Well, there was a few of them, but the one that I had to ask myself, I was helping the funeral director do up a funeral for this lady, and her husband was there, and he had a list, and he was checking it off, a pink gown, pink roses, casket, her hair done, her nails done. I mean, he had it all. And so when we got done, I gave him the price, and he said, well, let's just do it mine, only I don't want a pink casket. And I had never, ever heard of an at-need and a pre-need together. I said, no, we can do it. I'll get with you next week or something. No, I want to do it now. I just want to run one check. That's all. So we went through. He wanted a blue casket, no flowers, he said. Didn't want any flowers. The music could be the same as his wife, same minister, the whole bit. And he had his 2 boys with him. And he said, well, he wrote out the check, and he said, I just got enough money to take my boys out for supper tonight. And so evidently they did. They went out, and their families went out to eat that evening. And the next morning, when the boys got there, he was dead. He had shot himself.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I thought, what? Could I have missed something? I don't think so. Looking back, he had a list, everything. He had it planned. Everything was, yeah.
Well, and you being in that situation, like, I'm sure that wasn't the first person who came in with a list, making sure that they had all of their T's crossed and their I's dotted. That wasn't anything red flag or unusual for you. Like, that's the business you're in.
That was the business I was in. And most of them, if they didn't have, and a lot of them didn't have a list, they would say, I want just what mom had, or I want just what dad had, or, or the same thing I want the same thing that I had for my wife. Yeah. But he had the list. Yeah.
That's crazy. But it's so devastating and heartbreaking. And you sit there and you wonder, what could have I done? But honestly, what you did was a lot, because you took that burden off of those children. Right. And they didn't have to worry about handling any of that, or going, how do we afford this?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, he did. He was looking out for everybody. It was just a sad thing. I just felt very emotional about that one, And there's a lot of them in there that I did feel very emotional. And some of the stories didn't make it in the book, especially I had one, and it was the bitterness between the father and the mother. They were divorced, and you could just feel the hate in the room. And she was just going on. It was his fault. It was his fault. But the older son was cleaning a gun, and he didn't know that it was loaded, and shot the younger boy.
Oh
building.
no.
And I didn't, there was stories like that I didn't put in, but there was no way that I could make it. It just hurt. And the hate, I mean, you could just feel the hate. And I was so relieved when they left, him and her both, you know.
Right. Well,
So,
it puts you in an uncomfortable position, to say the absolute least.
yeah. Yeah. And I was surprised. Divorce is bad for children, but it's also bad if you can't have it agreeable. And people, you can't hate. I mean, hate is the opposite of love, and you just can't do that. It just makes everything worse.
It really
I don't
does.
care how, I don't care how bad you think that your spouse was or whatever, and maybe they were, but you don't need the hate. You got to go on because the hate's going to destroy you.
One of my favorite sayings is, I don't need that kind of negativity in my life.
That is true. Don't need it. Don't want it. Don't need it. Not going to have it. Yeah.
So, on that note, let's talk about your role with Optimist International, because that's your background right now if you're not watching the video version of the podcast. Tell me more about that organization and your role in it.
The Optimist organization has been around since the early 1900s. And there is a big book by Christian Larson, and it's called The Optimist Creed. And so the Optimist Creed is 10 stanzas. Promise yourself to be so strong that nothing will disturb your peace of mind. To talk health, happiness, and prosperity to every person you meet. To make all of your friends feel that there is something in them. To look at the sunny side of everything and make your optimism come true. To think only of the best, to work only for the best, and to expect only the best. And that's basically the way it is. It is a group of, say optimists, it's a group of people that come together that trying to bring out the best in themselves and the best in their communities, and to do things, even little things, for the kids in their communities to have a better life. So, like the club that I belong to here in Indiana, we always do a Christmas party for the Head Start kids. And we get them a toy, and we give them crayons and coloring books, and we give them toothbrushes, toothpaste. We give them blankets and pajamas and coats and everything. And we always put it in a great big huge trash bag, and then get a big huge Christmas bag to put over it. And we have them come with their parents, and we give them pizza, vegetable tray, and juice. And then Santa Claus comes and he gives them each a bag. But it isn't just the Head Start. We give it to their siblings also. So if they have a brother, or if they have a sister, or if they have 5, because that has happened to us, we buy the same thing for each child, because it's not fair to go to a Christmas party and you don't get anything. So we do that. And then when the party is over, then we have the parents pull up, and then we load their trunk of their vehicle with food, because we don't know whether those kids are eating those 2 weeks or not. And we have another Optimist Club that buys shoes for the kids when they start kindergarten at their school. And then we do a TriStar, like basketball and stuff like that. Our club also does a appreciation dinner where the parents and the grandparents could come. And if that student of the term was recognized, then we will read the letter that the teacher wrote about that student. And then, of course, they get a meal, and they get a toy or something, and they get a shirt that says student of the term, from the Optimist organization. So every club is different. Every community is different, and the needs are all different. And the community that my club is a very poor community. I used to think, oh, well, one of these days I want to be a missionary. I want to go, overseas or South America and save all the kids. But it's in America too. It's in our country, big time. And so it is bringing out, because that student of the term, I didn't realize just exactly how impactful that would be. But I went to visit a school classroom that they were doing something, and this student had on this purple shirt. which was our colors at that, that said West J Optimist on it. And I said, "Oh, I like your shirt." And he said, "Me too." He said, "I got it because I was student of the month." And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "I'm going to get another one too." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes." He said, "I'm working. This one's getting a little tight, so I need another one. I got this one last year." So I thought, well, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, making that meaningful impact.
Yes. Yeah. And the positivity, and you and I just talked about this before. To me, positivity is like faith. The opposite of faith is fear, and the opposite of positivity is negativity, and the opposite of optimism is pessimism. And you can't, life is too short. Life is too short. And the more you give of yourself, and the more you give to others, the better life that you have.
I couldn't agree more with you. And that just feels like the perfect place to wrap this up. That's a powerful sentence. Put a period at the end of it. Love it.
Where are you from?
I am in St. Cloud, Minnesota. So if you were to put a pin on where you think the middle of Minnesota is, right there.
Right there. Okay.
Yeah. And we have an Optimist club in this town, and I see them doing things here and there. I've never truly dug into what the Optimist organization is. So now I know, and now I want to get involved.
Please do. Please do. The organization before COVID, I think, was like 160,000. And then after COVID was done, it dropped down to 60,000.
My gosh.
Yeah. So, I mean, it isn't just it wasn't just the Optimist. The Lions Club and the Rotary and the Kiwanis did the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Afraid to get out, afraid to do things. And it's still that way a lot. Not like it was, but we're growing back. But, it's been a journey.
Yeah.
I wonder whether we're going to be able to save it. But in this day and age, you've got to have faith. You got to have positivity. That's just all I can say. Join an Optimist club.
Join the club. That's your call to action for the podcast. All the listeners,
that's exactly
join the club.
And buy a book.
And buy the book. You buy the book. My Life at the Cemetery. It's not as dead as you think. It's available on Amazon. And Sandy, this has been so wonderful. I'm so glad that we got to connect.
I am so too. I thank you for doing this, and thank you for helping, because if it wasn't for the podcast, people talking to everyday people, it just helps lift you up. And thank you for doing that. And I hope you go join an Optimist club.
You got me hooked. I'm going to go look into it this week.
And you tell them I sent you.
I will. Sandy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Abbey.